Welcome to Tales from the Bridge. This is episode 59, and Charlie Jean Anders is on the show. We were very excited to find out that Charlie Jean was going to join us on the bridge, and we hope you really enjoy this conversation. I want to hear more about comics. Apparently, Charlie Jean has been doing more comics and is more on the way, so I definitely want to hear more about that. All right, everyone's waiting for us. Let's make our way over to the bridge. Are thrilled to have author, journalist, and podcast host Charlie Jean Anders joining us today. Charlie has a mantle that boasts a Hugo, Nebula, Sturgeon, Lambda Literary, Crawford, and Locus Award, among others. She's the author of Victories, Greater Than Death, and Dreams Bigger Than Heartbreak, the first two books in a YA trilogy. She is also the author of the short story collection Even Greater Mistakes, and she has written a book about how to use creative writing to get through hard times called Never Say You Can't Survive. Her fiction and journalism have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Slate, McSweeney's, and Mother Jones. And she also has a TED Talk, Go Ahead and Dream About the Future, that is a must-watch. On top of all that, she still manages to co-host a podcast with fellow author and journalist Annalee Newitz called Our Opinions Are Correct. Charlie also keeps a British penny in her left shoe at all times. Welcome, Charlie. We really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us today. First, I think we're all keen to hear about this penny in your shoe.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been doing that for a long time. It's just one of those things that, it's become a habit. It's sort of, I feel like it's lucky or something. It's just, it's one of those things. It's just something that kind of, I think it's a lucky thing. And whenever I go back to the UK, I always try to grab a few extra pennies, which they're actually harder and harder to get. I feel like nobody uses them anymore. So it's actually kind of a challenge.
So can you tell us about your journey as an author and how you found yourself on this path? What your inspirations were?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been making up stories since I was a little kid, and I was a learning disabled kid when I was in elementary school and junior high, and I had one special education teacher in particular who really kind of worked with me, and part of how she got me to be able to do writing or to be able to do schoolwork was that she encouraged me to do creative stuff as well as like an outlet and as like an incentive, as like a bribe for me to, if I could get my schoolwork done, I could do other creative stuff. And then, I was writing a lot of fan fiction when I was in elementary school and junior high. I had like a thing in high school where a bunch of friends and I made up, kind of collaborative stories together in like on like a bulletin board almost that we were posting online. And it was just, I was always finding different ways to make up weird stories and to kind of be goofy and kind of screw around. And it was always just something that I felt like I would like to do as a career. And I kind of got into journalism after college because that was a more realistic way of actually getting paid to write. But in my heart, I always knew that I wanted to be a fiction writer. And it took me a long time of submitting my stuff and getting rejected everywhere and kind of banging my head against the wall before I really broke in as a fiction writer. It took many, many, many years.
What was that first book that broke through for you that kind of helped deliver your career?
I mean, it was really All the Birds in the Sky. And before that, it was 6 Months, 3 Days, the short story of mine that won the Hugo in, I think, like 2011, 2012, like 10 years ago. Gosh, that was kind of when I finally started to kind of break out and be kind of known as a fiction writer after having written fiction for a really long time.
6 Months, 3 Days was a great story.
Thank
I read
you.
it. It's in a compilation called 6 Months, 3 Days, 5 Others. And the 5 others are amazing too, I gotta say.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Thanks.
One of my favorite stories of all time is the Cartography of Sudden Death. That's
wow.
That's in here, and that's a time travel story, right? And a very interesting one. Unlike so many other, I don't know. It was wonderful, and I have to say, you log into the history of our podcast with the Fermi paradox is our business model. Kevin actually shared that to us, I don't know, years ago or way back, like when we just started the podcast. He happened to read this online. He posted it. We all read it. We talked about it. It's a wonderful story.
Thank you. Dang.
It's such a great take on the Fermi paradox and hilarious. And then, we all sort of, this is in the midst of time. And then when we got this interview booked with you, I went back and realized, holy smokes, Charlie Jean Anders wrote that story. So there you go.
Well, cool. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny. People don't often mention the Cartography of Sudden Death in particular because I don't know, it just kind of slid under the radar,
Mm,
like a lot of short fiction. It's like
yeah,
one of the sad things about short fiction is most of the time, unless you really get lucky or, just lightning strikes, short stories
yeah,
tend to kind of just come and go really fast. And like, it's hard to get a lot of recognition for them. And like,
yeah.
I actually had this idea of writing a lot more stories about that character, Jemima Brookwater. There was going to
Hmm.
be a whole series, and I kind of wrote pieces of a couple other stories about her, and for various reasons, it just didn't quite work out. Like, I think I just kind of partly the lack of response to the first story, but partly also just kind of some logistical issues with the other stories I was trying to write about her. It just got kind of bogged down, and I ended up kind of putting them aside. But I still
Hmm.
have all those fragments somewhere, and I'd love to go back to them one day.
Yeah, well, I would buy a book full of stories about that character in that
Oh,
world, or
cool. Well,
maybe a
thank
novel
you.
if it turns into that one day,
Oh my
because I
gosh.
thought it was a
Yeah.
tremendously interesting, world that you built for time travel specifically in that. All the Birds in the Sky was also great. This is like a neat sci-fi and fantasy combo, right? Or in a sense, in that the two main characters, one's sort of an engineer and science guy, and one's a witch or a wizard, or I'm not sure. I don't quite remember
Yeah,
what the
witch.
terminology
Yeah.
is, but it was a great combo of those worlds.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I love to bring together people who kind of don't entirely fit together or come from different worldviews and kind of force them to spend time together so that we kind of get them. I mean, that's a lot of my fiction, one way or the other, is taking people who kind of come from different worlds and pushing them together.
Well, and you mentioned when you were describing where you started that you did some fan fiction. Is that something you ever talk about, or what was that fan fiction all about?
I mean, it was mostly Doctor Who fan fiction, and it was mostly like when I was in like fourth and fifth grade. I don't have any of it anymore. I suspect that it was kind of a pastiche of like Terrence Dicks's Doctor Who novelizations, with some flourishes of my own. I don't think it was especially. I doubt that it was that great, but I kept trying to write like I don't know. I mean, in when I was years later in the late '80s, early like in the early '90s, I guess. Uh, there was a thing when they were actually publishing original Doctor Who novels, and they were open to submissions from anyone. And I was like a teenager, and I was like, well, I'm going to write an original Doctor Who novel and send it to them. So
Awesome.
in a sense, I never quit writing Doctor Who fanfic. I just started trying to actually get it published professionally. And sadly, nobody was interested in publishing one of my Doctor Who novels. I mean, I sometimes wonder where I would be in my career right now if I had broken as a Doctor Who novelist, in my teens. What would I be doing now? Probably it would have. I don't know how it would have panned out for me, but yeah. So I mean, I guess I just sort of tried to level up as a Doctor Who writer.
There's always
Well,
opportunities, Charlie. You can do that today, maybe, right? No, no.
I
Okay.
I have plenty of ideas for Doctor Who stories, but nobody's come knocking. And once or twice I've kind of pinged the folks who do the Doctor Who comics, and I've been like, "Hi, I have ideas," and like have not really gotten anything from them. So,
mhm.
and I'm busy working on other stuff, so it's not really, I'm kind of busy.
I got to know who's your favorite Doctor Who?
Oh man, I mean, for a long time I would have said Tom Baker, just because he was kind of the classic original. Now I think it's between like David Tennant, Tom Baker, and like I don't know. Peter Capaldi was pretty great. Jodie Whittaker was great. I kind of love them all differently, but I still have a huge soft spot for both Tom Baker and David Tennant.
I kind of love Matt Smith. He really stole
I
my heart
love
right
Matt
with
Smith
that first
too. He
season,
was he was
and
fantastic.
he was so good. And I love that now he's become the Game of Thrones guy with this like totally different
Right.
attitude, badass sort of character to him. And I was like, oh, remember when he was Doctor Who? That was so great.
Yeah, that is so weird. It's weird that he's kind of made that jump.
Yeah.
He's done a lot of stuff. He was in The Crown, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was great in The Crown too. Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, Charlie Jane, I read I read your both your novels, and The City in the Middle of the Night really stuck with me in a different way. And it was actually through a conversation with a friend that she made me realize that the most unique part of that book was exactly what you just said. It's about the other, right? You do an amazing job of capturing, an alien, a truly alien, especially in that book, right? Like, these aliens are weird and they're psychoactive and psychotropic, and they got tongues and they move differently. Like, it's a really, really great, I don't know, description and creation of a real other. Um, and I just wanted to say that was amazing. I love that part of that book. And we actually talk about the other a fair bit on this show. We've interviewed Adrian Tchaikovsky twice,
Oh
actually,
yeah.
just
Oh wow.
last week,
Okay.
and he does an
Yeah,
amazing
he's
alien
amazing.
other too, right? Like, he's very much about the empathy, and I don't know if there's a question here, but maybe now that I've talked my way around to empathy, I'll say, you do treat the other in your work, and is that a way of talking about empathy, about being in another person's shoes?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like a lot of my writing, one way or the other, is about empathy and about like learning to understand other perspectives. And I love kind of trying to figure out how to write consciousnesses and perspectives that are so different from our own, whether that's like aliens or magical creatures or like artificial intelligences. In my young adult books, the third book of the young adult trilogy, which comes out in April, I actually decided to just kind of take the plunge and have some chapters from the POV of some alien characters who are like they're some of the one of them is in the first book and the second book. One of them is only in the second book before this, but we'd only see them through the eyes of the human characters of the first two books. And then in the third book, I'm like, nah, you know what? We're going to see things through the eyes of this alien character, and we're going to just get a really different perspective on everything that's going on, and just kind of try to turn things upside down a little bit to show how maybe we weren't really understanding what this alien character was really going through and what they were thinking, because we were seeing them from the outside. And no idea how people are going to react to that. I feel like it's something that is a little bit of a risk. And luckily, my editor was willing to just like go with me on it, because I think a lot of editors would have said, you're not supposed to like suddenly start giving us like chapters from the point of view of like a giant fire breathing beetle in a YA book. That's not really what YA is for. But nobody, and I feel like it makes it much more interesting and much more kind of, I don't know, it just kind of adds another dimension to the story in a way. Hopefully.
Is it a challenge to kind of, I guess, write out the human as you're writing the fire breathing beetle? Like, you just go, actually, that's such a human trope. Like, that would, or that's such a human habit. No bug would think that way, or alien or something. Like, how hard is that to sort of make that disconnect?
Yeah, it's a little hard. And, I mean, I think that it really depends on what kind of book you're writing. For this book, I really wanted to make the fire breathing beetle character, whose name is Windgonk, I wanted to make fire perspective like really relatable and like really understandable to, to general readers. And so it's more just about like kind of quote unquote universal things like, yeah, this character, Windgonk, feels a lot of resentment and feels like fire has to kind of, fire's pronouns are fire. And fire has to like kind of embody, this kind of has to kind of occupy this role in everybody else's lives that is kind of like a performance their fire is putting on. And I think it's just like it's about like trying to get into how it actually feels to be that person, whether even if they're not human. And to some extent, I feel like part of what is both great and kind of limiting about space opera is that often when you have aliens, they do have a perspective that's recognizable as human. And I think that you can make that work to your advantage. I think if I was going to write from the POV, I mean, I did write a little bit from the POV of the Gelet in City in the Middle of the Night. And there I really did try to make it weird and just like not, not entirely relatable. But I feel like that was a very different type of book and a very different kind of, different goal, I think, of what I was doing. But I love kind of trying to write really different perspectives. I think it's really fun.
What are these YA books called?
Yeah, it's the Unstoppable series. And the first one, you all mentioned it, it's Victories Greater Than Death. And then the sequels are Dreams Bigger Than Heartbreak and Promises Stronger Than Darkness. And basically they're very kind of Star Trek, Star Star Wars, Guardians of the Galaxy influenced kind of space opera books. They're about like an epic hero. There's actually the main character, Tina, who's really the main character of the first book, is actually the clone of this epic alien hero who was left on Earth as a baby, disguised as a human, to hide her from her enemies until she was old enough to go back into space and kind of regain her memories of her former life and kind of resume her existence as like the savior of the galaxy. And so she actually is really desperate to get back out there. And she's grown up on Earth, but she has known for a long time that she's actually secretly an alien, and she wants to just leave this disappointing planet and get back out in space and like be an epic hero again. And then she does get out into space and kind of, spoiler alert, kind of realizes that actually that's not really what she wants. She doesn't want to be that person. She wants to be her own person and kind of make her own path. And so she ends up kind of rejecting that epic hero kind of archetype and try to become somebody a little bit different.
And who is that person? Who's the
I
person?
mean, it's
she
more
decides she wants-
complicated. I think she's less like trying to just save everybody and, be like the person who swoops in and saves you and then like disappears, and be somebody who actually has friends and is there for her friends and is kind of more part of a chosen family. Also more, especially by the third book, which this is a little bit of a spoiler, but she really spends a lot of time in the third book thinking about how to be a better ally and how to kind of build more lasting relationships with other people and other types of life forms instead of just, like I said, swooping in and saving you and then piecing out kind of. And I think that she's really kind of trying to figure out who she wants to be. And she doesn't want to kill people, which is a big part of, if you're going to be the epic savior of the galaxy, you're going to have to kill a lot of people probably. And she doesn't want to do that. So she kind of steps back and thinks about that and how she wants to handle the very real threats that she's facing if she's not going to just, shoot everybody in sight kind of.
So the ally is the hero who stays.
Yeah, I think that that's actually true. And like, that's a big theme that I'm kind of trying to play with is like, what if instead of just like saving the day and like I said, piecing out, you actually try to understand these other alien cultures that you've been protecting and try to like build a better relationship with them and kind of form a real, community.
When is the third book going to be coming out?
Yeah, the third book is out in April 11th, pretty much a year to the day after the second book. And and I guess the second book is going to be out in paperback soon as well, because they usually come out. Usually the paperback comes out a little bit before the hardcover of the next book. So I would guess the paperback of the second book will be out in like February.
Got it. And that's Dreams Bigger Than Heartbreak.
Yeah.
Got it. What about YA? I mean, why? I mean, I have to admit, I'll read a book, and after I'm done it, somebody will say, "Hey, Kevin, that was a YA book," and I'll say, "Really? I had no idea." But to what extent is YA different? And what are your thoughts on that genre?
I mean, I feel like YA is always changing as are books in general. And so it's really always hard to generalize, but I do think YA is a bit different. And I also think it is completely possible. Like I have arguments all the time with people I know about like whether a book we all read was YA or not. Like people will be like, "Oh no, that was totally YA. The main character is, kind of young and there's all these things going on." I was like, "Nope, it's not YA because look, it was published by this publisher that doesn't do YA. And also if you look at it, there's all these, more adult themes here and there." It's a little bit like there's plenty of books that could be published as either one. And in fact, my friend Liz Huerta always tells this story about like she sold a novel and her agent, or she was selling a novel and her agent said, "Well, look, I think we can sell this as either YA or adult. Which would you rather?" And she asked her agent, "What's the difference between YA and adult?" And the agent said, $10. Because that's the difference in cover price for a hardcover in YA versus adult. And so if you want your book to be cheaper in hardcover, you publish it as YA. But I think that, it's also true though, that there are some stylistic differences. This is something that I had to really grapple with when I started writing YA. I had to really learn how to do this. I think that a YA book generally is faster paced, generally kind of just like cuts to the chase a lot faster. Scenes are just shorter, sentences are often shorter, paragraphs can be shorter, chapters are often much shorter. and you just have to get to the point. And also, there's more emotion right on the surface. It's more emotionally intense. There's less maybe like irony and distancing than you'd find in a lot of adult fiction. And you know, YA books are probably more likely to be present tense, more likely to be a lot of them are first person, or even if they're not first person, they're very tight third person. They tend to be very kind of like rooted in one person's perspective and experience. But part of what made me want to write YA was I was seeing just a ton of books that were just fun, adventure kind of romps, where it was just like we're off on a grand adventure, and like we're just kind of like going through a bunch of challenges and battles and fights, and we're kind of getting to the bottom of some mystery, and it's just like a fun romp. And so I was like, I want to write one of those. That sounds really fun.
I think those fun romps are sought after, and there's a reason why I think a lot of non-young adults also like this genre. It's accessible. Who doesn't like a complex? I like a complex storyline, but I also like this type of romp as you're describing as well. That's really cool that you're doing that.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've talked to David Brin. He's got a YA series going actually through other writers, I think, and then Paolo Bacigalupi, right? He's got a YA series that he's doing. There's a lot of like sort of big sci-fi mainstream authors who are now moving into YA, and one of our books of the month was Red Rising, yeah, by Pierce Brown, and that's it has this flavor of YA. We realized sort of as we were reading it, it gets more mature later. But yeah, that's when I realized what YA is just a tight plot with more going on, right? In fewer pages. Like it's just a page turner. You gotta there's all sorts of interesting things. And so it's more accessible to a wider audience. And heck, if you can catch a young audience and make them love you when they're 12, guess what? They'll probably keep reading your books too, right? So I think it's a neat trend in publishing.
Yeah, I mean, I really like it, and I do feel like there are some books being published as YA now, which maybe like 30 years ago would have been published as adult fiction.
Yeah.
And I think that I mean, things move around, but the kind of like fun seat of your pants adventure that maybe would have been published as an adult book in the 90s is now a YA book, just because that's where that is now.
Kids these days, they're just so much more mature.
We've been talking a lot about on the show about the different trends that we've been seeing in sci-fi, and I mean that's a subject that's always coming up, and it does feel like over the past, I want to say 10 years, it feels that sci-fi in particular has evolved into a more diverse space where new voices are surfacing and sharing their stories. And maybe on one hand, it doesn't feel like it should be that surprising that it's in sci-fi that this is happening, but I always felt that it was more traditionally leaning towards the science side of things rather than the social side of things. And many of your central characters are queer or trans and bring a refreshing perspective to your storytelling. Is this sense of renaissance just wishful thinking on my part, or are there obstacles that our readers aren't seeing or an unspoken line that you're still not able to cross as a trans author?
Man, that's such a tough question. I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's been so much great work coming out in the last 5 years, particularly from marginalized authors of all types, including queer and trans authors. And I do feel like people are really pushing the boundaries in various ways. You never really kind of know what you're going to be able to get away with as an author until you get away with it. And part of me thought that a lot of stuff in All the Birds in the Sky I would never be allowed to do because I was breaking so many like unspoken rules of publishing, like having the book kind of start out with them as kids and then they grow up, and like having kind of a third person narrator who kind of sometimes slides into being omniscient. It's kind of like, it's you can sort of fool yourself into thinking it's tight third person in places, but then it kind of opens out and it's very clearly omniscient in places. And just like some of the weird humor in that book, I was like, I'm never going to be allowed to do this. But I feel like part of what I think makes for a good book is often that feeling of like, am I going to get away with this? Am I going to get in trouble for doing this? And then you don't, you get rewarded for doing it. I mean, not always, but I feel like when you look at like the books that people have like fallen in love with, they're often the books where the author was like, man, I'm going to get in so much trouble for writing this, you know? And I think that that's part of the part of what makes things interesting is if you're kind of deliberately trying to kind of go right up to the edge of what you think you can get away with as an author, whatever that is, whatever kind of experiment or challenging thing that is.
Yeah, writing is an innovation process, isn't it? If you wind up going too edgy, it might not stick, but you gotta be a little bit there for you to be doing something innovative. And I guess that's the risk you take when you're an author such as yourself writing books like you do. Is and so far as I can tell, looking at your list of awards and recognitions, you've been getting a lot of hits.
I mean, I think I'm hanging in there. I think it's just, I mean, I really believe that I want to, I mean, I'm just going to say this as an I statement rather than as a generalization. I want to keep challenging myself and I want to keep doing things that feel, I don't know if risky is the right word, but, things that feel like, oh, this could really blow up in my face. And then luckily you don't have to just like finish a book and put it out into the world. You can show it to a ton of beta readers and friends and sensitivity readers, and you can show it to your editor, and lots of people will weigh in on a book before it actually gets into bookstores. But I think that when I feel like I'm kind of unicycling over a deep chasm on a tightrope or whatever, that's usually when I feel like I'm doing the most interesting and most kind of rewarding, kind of most nourishing work. I feel like you have to kind of keep challenging yourself. And part of what I've loved about moving into different areas, like YA and like when I've written for television and writing for comics, is that you keep kind of having things where you're like, wow, I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm going to just figure it out as I go. Because I think that feeling, it's really easy to lose that when you've been writing for a while. It's easy to just be like, now I know what I'm doing and I know exactly how to do this. And I think the moment you think that, you're starting to kind of decay a little bit. You're starting to fall apart.
And you did it. Well, you did a TED talk. I mentioned this earlier. Like that's a departure and in a different direction as well.
Whew.
And
Yeah.
and I mean, I'm public speaking in front of people. Like this is okay. No one sees me trembling or sees my tongue swelling. But that idea of being up in front of a camera and all of that seems terrifying to me. And you touched upon something in your TED talk that we had a heated discussion over, and this was with regards to active dreaming. And so, if anyone hasn't
Oh,
checked out the TED Talk, it's go ahead and dream the future. And in it, you speak about the tools that we can use to imagine the future. And you mentioned active dreaming, and could you
I
could
guess
you
I did.
go
Yeah.
into that?
Man, yeah, doing that TED Talk was nerve-wracking, by the way. It was a lot. Like they don't want you to memorize it exactly, but you kind of have to memorize it. It's one of those things where like they want you to kind of be speaking naturally. What I did actually was I took my TED Talk and I kept paraphrasing it slightly, or like I'd try to say all the same things but like in different sentences, different words, so that I wasn't just like repeating the lines or whatever, but I had like the thoughts in my head or whatever. It was really hard to just get up and like be kind of spontaneously saying all this stuff, but have it make sense. It was a little challenging. But yeah, I mean, I feel like something I've been saying a lot lately that is kind of one of my kind of catchphrases, for better or worse, is I keep saying daydreaming is important, serious work, and I really believe that. I think daydreaming is hard work and it's important work. And I used to kind of beat myself up when I was writing because I would, instead of typing frantically on my keyboard, I would be staring into space, just kind of zoning out. And then at some point, I decided to give myself a break because I realized that the zoning out and staring into space is usually what happened right before something really cool came to me. And I was able to kind of come up with like something that was like, oh, dang, this is a really cool scene, or this is a really cool idea, or this is what's going to happen next in the story. And I feel like that kind of going into a trance almost really, fueled my writing in a way and helped me to kind of keep um, coming up with new ideas and kind of stay plugged into what's going on in the story. And if I don't do that, the story starts to kind of bog down, I guess. But, it's just, yeah, I feel like you have to find ways to kind of spark your imagination, whatever that looks like for you.
Is that what you mean by active dreaming, like daydreaming, like being awake but imagining things, or
I
was
guess
that a
so.
different?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly what I said in the talk, but I think that I mean, the central point of that TED talk is that you don't predict the future, you imagine the future, and that for a lot of us, accessing your imagination is something that you have to kind of work at. It's something you have to kind of put a lot of effort into, and to get at your imagination, you have to kind of be able to open things up a little bit. And so, for me, I think that um, I think that is active dreaming for me. Is just sort of,
Mhm.
but also specifically when you're trying to picture the future, just sort of trying to like kind of paint a picture in your head, I guess, based on stuff that you think is likely to develop, or like it can be based on like facts or trends or technologies that you can see coming, but kind of making that into a real kind of grounded kind of plausible thing. That's something a little bit different, I think.
Hmm.
Applied imagining. We should do degrees in
Yeah, I
that.
think so.
Hmm.
I think so.
Actually, a fair number of the science fiction authors that we talk to also moonlight as futurists for various corporations or governments or military establishments. Do you do any of that? Do you do the futurism thing? Professionally imagine the future for people?
Not so much. No, I mean I've not really. No, I've done a little bit of I don't know, not really. I talked to some folks once or twice about like coming in and being like a futurist or whatever at their
Yeah.
companies, but I got really busy and it just didn't work out. But
Mhm.
I know that that's it's a really cool thing to do because you get to actually kind of apply your um you get to kind of apply your ideas to something very practical, but haven't really done a lot of it.
Well, I think you're doing a good job of creating that space for daydreaming, right? I mean, that's part of the creative process. You don't want to fill your time with too many extracurriculars, and
That's
it's an active
Yeah, that's
process
really true.
to daydream. Hmm.
Just getting time to write is actually kind of, even though I'm writing full time now, it feels like I never have time to write. Too many other things to take care of, too much business to like handle.
Well, you got to talk to us right now and not right? It's-
It's a delight to talk to y'all. It's lovely.
so what are you working on now? Where do you see you? Where do you want to go? And not just what you're working on now, but what would you? What's the direction you want to take that's maybe a little different than what you've been working on?
Yeah, I mean, so currently I just kind of I think the last finishing touches on Promise is Stronger Than Darkness. That's off in production now at Tor Teen. That's coming out in April. And then um, I have this adult novel, which is coming out I don't even know when it's coming out. It hasn't been announced yet. I'm hoping it'll come out in 2024. It's about half written, and I haven't worked on it in a while, and I'm trying to get back into it. And it's an adult novel. It's a little bit smaller and more intimate than the YA books. It's more fantasy. I'm very excited about it, and I'm really eager to get back into it. And I want to write more stuff like that again. I've been working on young adult books a lot, so I'd like to kind of write maybe a few more adult novels in the next few years. And then, meanwhile, I'm doing a lot of comic stuff. I'm writing some issues of New Mutants for Marvel, and I helped to
Wow.
create a new superhero character from Marvel named Escapade, who just made her debut over the summer, and now she's appearing in New Mutants with me writing her. And so I'm hoping to do more of that. I'm hoping to really just keep writing comics. Like fingers crossed, I'd love to just, do a ton of comics over the next few years. So more slightly more literary adult novels, I think, and then also some comics, hopefully some superhero comics. Those are my two goals. And then, I might do more television stuff too. We'll see what happens.
So
Wow.
Escapade, what is Escapade's superpower? Can we learn more about her
Yeah, so
Or him?
Escapade's
or him?
superpower, she is a she. Her superpower is
She's
basically
a
that
she.
she can trade places with anybody. And like at the most basic level, that's like if you're holding her at gunpoint, she can flip it so that she's holding you at gunpoint. She can actually trade locations with people, but she has to be within about 7 feet for any of this to work. But also, she could trade kind of situations with people. So, like, um, if you're the mayor of the town, she could be the mayor of the town for a few hours, and people would just be like, "Oh, it's Escapade. She's the mayor now," and like people would just accept that she's mayor. And like, if you're like, she could take someone's superpowers. Like if she's next to Wolverine, she could have Wolverine's powers for a few hours, and Wolverine would just be an ordinary person or whatever for a few hours. Wolverine would be really upset probably. And she can basically any kind of attribute, any aspect of someone else's situation, she can kind of borrow it and kind of like leave the other person kind of without it for a while. And unfortunately, her power, like it only lasts a few hours. She has to be within like 6 or 7 feet of you to work for it to work. And it often goes wrong because this stuff is so subjective and so kind of slippery that she might want to take Wolverine's superpowers, but she might accidentally just like have Wolverine's jacket or whatever. If Wolverine's wearing a jacket, she could be wearing Wolverine's jacket instead of having his superpowers. Or, you know, I have a thing that I ended up not being able to use in one of the comics. I hope I get to use it at some point where she's trying to get inside a very secure facility. And so she's like, I'm just going to like sneak up near this one person and borrow their security clearance. So that like for the next few hours, I have their security clearance and like all the security systems will recognize that I have clearance. But unfortunately, instead of taking their security clearance, she takes their insecurities. And so for the next few hours, she's just insecure about a bunch of stuff about this person's marriage and about their family life and their career. And she's like obsessing about all this like stuff that's actually someone else's insecurities. And so it's like, oh yeah, no, that didn't work out. So stuff like that, like it's not
That's
fun unless her
fantastic.
power goes wrong a lot of the time. Yeah, so
So she's
I really
the
hope I get to
she's
use that insecurities thing at some point. But yeah, stuff like that.
That's great. So she's the empathy superhero. Her superpower is like
I
super empathy,
mean, she's more like
effectively
just a
by
big
switching things.
trickster. She's kind of a big trickster. Like.
Does she does she like defeat herself accidentally by tuning in too much into the motivations of her enemy, so that she
I mean,
realizes,
that's a
oh,
danger,
she
I
was in the
think.
wrong?
Like, I mean, I think that sometimes she does get she gets more than she wants in terms of like understanding what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. But I don't think it's really about empathy most of the time. It's mostly about just like pulling the wool over people's eyes. It's about like, she's really good at sneaking into places and kind of getting access to stuff because she can kind of borrow whatever she needs to borrow from people to get what she needs to get, kind of.
When you develop a character like Escapade, or maybe even in your fiction, are you drawing on people or elements of people or do you kind of are you birthing a new imaginative being at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I don't usually draw on people I know, at least not too much, because I feel like that, especially when you've been writing for a while, you kind of that gets less and less feasible. And I think that you have to kind of get better at I don't know, creating a character out of whole cloth, but also out of like finding experiences in your own life that you can kind of draw on emotionally and like um imaginatively to create a character. I think that a lot of creating a character is finding their voice, first of all, but also I talk about this a lot in my writing advice book, Never Say You Can't Survive. I think that part of creating a character and having them have kind of staying power and, uh, being someone you want to spend a lot of time with is you have to get curious about them. You have to have stuff about them that you want to understand better, or that you want to see how things turn out for them. There has to be something where you're like, oh, I want to see where that goes. I want to see what that's about. And so having that kind of like mystery or that kind of curiosity really makes you keep delving into a character more, versus if you feel like, oh, I get what this character is about and I know exactly what's going to happen with them and I know exactly what's going on in their head. Like, it just, the more you have to kind of figure it out, the more you're going to want to keep delving. And that's kind of part of the writing process, I think, is trying to get to the bottom of it, kind of.
In this book, Never Say You Can't Survive, this was a book that you wrote for people to use so they could use creative writing to get them through hard times. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I started working on it I was kind of noodling on it a little bit in 2019, but I really started working on it in early 2020. And, I had this idea that 2020 might be a really rough year for a bunch of people. And I had this idea for a book about like how creative writing can keep us from losing our stuffing during a really terrible time in history, but also in our own lives, and how it can be kind of a source of comfort and distraction and fulfillment. And so I was like, I wanted to write a book that was kind of like a how-to guide, but also had kind of this, for lack of a better term, therapeutic aspect about like, yeah, you can do this, and also doing this can help you feel better and help you kind of cope. And that was the thing that, I wasn't sure how it was going to resonate with people, but I've been really, really happy with the response to it so far. People have been really embracing it. And it turned out that 2020 was indeed a year when a lot of people, like, I was kind of serializing it online before it was published as a book. And it changed a lot before the book came out. But the versions of it that were going up on the internet like every week in 2020, I felt like a lot of people were like, it was a good time to be publishing a book like that.
Yeah.
So I was just looking up Escapade, and for those who are interested, this is in Marvel's Voices Pride, I think you mentioned, published in June of 2022. So we can Google that, and we can buy it, and we can download it too. So it looks, I'm going to get it. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it's that whole issue. It's like got my story, and it's got a few other stories in it. It's really fun. And then, after that, it definitely is good if you start with Marvel Voices Pride 2022. But then she's appearing in New Mutants, starting with New Mutants number 31, and which came out a few weeks ago. And those are I'm having so much fun with those. They're just such a blast.
I was collecting New Mutant in the 80s, like before
wow.
I was 10. Like this is just blowing my mind. Like I was the original comic book kid, and New Mutants, man, they've been there since the X-Men, or since just after the X-Men, and all the things that have become famous now.
Since 82. Yeah. I have like a giant hardcover omnibus of the early New Mutants comics. It's like 1,200 pages of like all of the New Mutants from like the early 80s, and like I'm slowly getting through it. It's so amazing. I love it so much. I'm not sure if this episode is going to go up when NaNoWriMo. I guess NaNoWriMo is almost over. Gosh, is it December already? Geez. Well, so I'm not going to mention NaNoWriMo. I guess I'm just going to say, if people who are listening to this are writers or want to be writers, I really encourage you to just stick to it. And it took me a while to break in, but it's been the most fulfilling and awesome and, just, I don't know, nourishing thing I could possibly imagine. And I've just gotten to know so many cool people as a result of being a writer. And I feel like it's a great way to have an amazing community. And it's also a great way to kind of get to know yourself better. I really think that writing is just like a wonderful thing to do, and highly recommend it for everybody.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Charlie. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was such a thrill. Yay, have a lovely evening, everybody.
You too. Take care.
So much. Yeah, great job.
That was a lot of fun. Thank you for joining us, Charlie. If you liked this interview, please go back and check out other interviews with other great authors and filmmakers and actors. We've got a lot more coming your way in the near future. Thanks for joining us today. Until next time.